"You got something to say, boy?" Captain Samuel Green sneered, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting violently into Trevor's wrists. The alleyway was dead quiet, save for the menacing crackle of the police radio. "I own these streets. You're just another statistic." Trevor Cox didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He just stared into the corrupt captain's eyes with a chilling, deadpan calm. "You shouldn't have done that, Captain." Green laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He had no idea that in exactly 14 minutes his entire precinct would be swarming with federal agents. The afternoon sun was a blistering, unforgiving weight on the cracked pavement of Fifth Avenue. Heat waves shimmered off the hoods of parked cars, and the air hung thick with the smell of hot asphalt, exhaust fumes, and the greasy, deep-fried aroma wafting from O'Rourke's diner. Inside the diner, the atmosphere was marginally cooler, the ancient air conditioning unit rattling in the window like a dying engine. Trevor Cox sat in a corner booth, nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee. He was a young black man dressed in unassuming, slightly faded clothes, a charcoal grey hoodie, worn-in denim jeans, and scuffed work boots. To anyone else, he was just another local resident trying to escape the sweltering heat of the city. He kept his eyes locked on a slightly outdated newspaper, his demeanour quiet, completely blending into the background of clinking silverware and low, murmuring conversations. But the peace of the diner was violently shattered when the glass door swung open, the bell above it ringing with an alarmed frenzy. In walked Captain Samuel Green of the 74th Precinct. Green was a large, imposing man whose very presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He wore his uniform not as a symbol of public service, but as a king's mantle. His brass badges were polished to a mirror shine, contrasting sharply with the heavy, arrogant slouch of his shoulders. Behind him flanked two younger officers, their eyes darting around the diner like hyenas looking for scraps. Green had a reputation. In this neighbourhood, his name was synonymous with extortion, brutality and systemic fear. He was the law, the judge and the executioner. Green strode up to the counter, ignoring the line of paying customers, and demanded a coffee. As he turned, his cold, slate-grey eyes swept over the diner. They stopped on Trevor. For Green, a man like Trevor sitting quietly was an affront to his authority. The captain thrived on subservience. He demanded that the residents of his precinct look at the floor when he walked by. Trevor, deep in thought, simply glanced up, met Green's gaze for a fraction of a second, and went back to reading. That was all it took. Green's face flushed with a dark, ugly red. He signalled his officers, and the three of them marched over to Trevor's booth, their heavy boots thudding against the checkered linoleum floor. The entire diner went deathly silent. Waitresses froze in place. Customers suddenly found their plates fascinating. "You got a problem, friend?" Green asked, his voice a low, gravelly threat that vibrated with malice. He slapped his heavy, calloused hand flat onto Trevor's newspaper, pinning it to the table. On Green's wrist, a heavy, solid gold Rolex Submariner caught the diner's fluorescent light, a watch no honest police captain's salary could ever afford. Trevor slowly looked up, his expression completely blank. He didn't show fear, which only infuriated Green further. "No problem, officer. Just, reading the news." "I asked you a question, boy." Green spat, heavily emphasizing the derogatory word, letting it hang in the stifling air like a venomous cloud. "When a captain of the law looks at you, you show some respect. Stand up." Trevor remained seated. His voice was perfectly measured, devoid of any aggressive inflection. "Am I under arrest, Captain? Because if I'm not, I'd like to finish my coffee in peace." Green's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. The sheer audacity of this young man questioning him in public, in his territory, was unfathomable. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of stale tobacco and peppermint. "You are now resisting a lawful order, disturbing the peace. Let's see what else we can find in your pockets when we get you back to the house." Before Trevor could utter another word, the two flanking officers lunged forward. They yanked him violently out of the booth, knocking his coffee mug to the floor where it shattered, the dark liquid pooling like blood. They slammed Trevor face first against the greasy diner window. "Hands behind your back!" one of the officers barked, driving a knee hard into Trevor's thigh. Trevor didn't fight back. He went entirely limp, allowing them to wrench his arms backward. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, clicking tightly. The metal bit sharply into his skin, an intentional, painful tightness. Green stepped up behind him, leaning in close to Trevor's ear. "You think you're smart, boy? You think you know your rights? Out here on these streets, your rights are whatever I say they are, and today I say you don't have any. Trevor kept his face pressed against the warm glass, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of the diner patrons. He committed every detail to memory. "You're making a catastrophic mistake, Captain," Trevor whispered, his voice steady. Green chuckled, a dark rumbling sound that echoed in the silent diner. "Get this piece of trash in the cruiser," he ordered. He had absolutely no idea that he had just signed his own professional and literal death warrant. The back of the Ford Police Interceptor utility smelled heavily of bleach, old sweat, and the unmistakable metallic tang of fear. The hard, moulded plastic seat offered no comfort, designed specifically to dehumanize and punish whoever was thrown onto it. Trevor Cox sat rigidly, his hands constrained painfully behind his back, his shoulders aching from the unnatural angle. The thick plexiglass partitions separated him from Captain Green in the passenger seat and Officer Miller, who was driving. The cruiser sped through the city streets, the siren off but the light bar flashing, parting the midday traffic like Moses at the Red Sea. From the back seat, Trevor watched the neighborhood roll by through the heavy wire-meshed window. He saw the boarded-up storefronts, the corner bodegas where Green's men undoubtedly collected protection money, and the anxious faces of civilians who quickly looked away as the cruiser passed. This was Green's kingdom, a fiefdom built on a foundation of absolute corruption and unchecked power. "Did you see the look on that punk's face?" Officer Miller laughed, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror to sneer at Trevor. "Thought he was a lawyer or something. Am I under arrest?" Miller mimicked Trevor's calm tone, contorting his face into a mocking exaggeration. Captain Green let out a satisfied grunt, adjusting the air conditioning vent to blow directly onto his face. "They all think they're lawyers until the cuffs go on. This generation, they watch too many cop shows. They think the world owes them an explanation. I'm just providing a reality check." Green turned his heavy frame in the passenger seat, sliding the plexiglass window open just a crack so his voice could carry into the back. "So, what's your story, kid? You running drugs? You a lookout for the local gangs? Let me guess, you're going to tell me you're just a good boy on his way to church." Trevor remained entirely silent. His eyes were fixed forward, not meeting Green's gaze. Inside his mind, however, a completely different reality was unfolding. Trevor was not panicking. He was working. He was meticulously cataloguing the conversation. "Silent type," Green noted, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I like the silent types. They usually scream the loudest when we get to the basement of the 74th. You see, down there the cameras haven't worked in about 3 years. Budget cuts, you know. It's a real tragedy." Miller chuckled again, turning the steering wheel sharply to navigate around a delivery truck. "Captain, what are we writing him up for?" "Let's see," Green mused, rubbing his stubbled chin. "Resisting arrest, obviously. Assault on a police officer. I think I felt him try to kick you, Miller, didn't you?" "Oh, absolutely, Captain. Nearly broke my shin." Miller lied effortlessly. "There you go. And we'll probably find a bag of crystal in his pocket during the strip search. Typical street trash." Green looked back at Trevor, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "You're looking at 3 to 5 years, boy. Minimum. Unless, of course, you want to be useful. You give me names, you give me the local drop spots. Maybe I let you walk out of the precinct with a bruised ego and a warning." Trevor took a slow, deep breath. Underneath his heavy hoodie, woven directly into the fabric of his undershirt, was a state-of-the-art military-grade biometric recording device. It wasn't just capturing audio, it was actively transmitting it via an encrypted cellular burst to a secure server. Every slur, every threat, every admission of planted evidence was being catalogued by the FBI's Colour of Law unit. "I don't have any names for you, Captain," Trevor finally spoke, his voice incredibly calm, devoid of the frantic desperation Green was so used to hearing. "I'm just a citizen." "A citizen," Green mocked, shaking his head. "Out here there are no citizens. There are predators and there is prey. Today, you're prey. By the time I'm done with you, you're going to be begging to sign whatever confession I put in front of you." The cruiser took a sharp left, the imposing, brutalist concrete structure of the 74th Precinct looming into view. It looked less like a police station and more like a fortress, surrounded by high fences and razor wire, the physical embodiment of Green's corrupt regime. "Welcome to my house, boy," Green said as the car descended into the underground sallyport, the heavy steel gates grinding shut behind them, sealing them in the dark. "Let's see how tough you are when the sun goes down." Trevor didn't blink. He just stared at the back of Green's neck, knowing with absolute, terrifying certainty that this was the last time Captain Samuel Green would ever ride in the front seat of a police car. The interior of the 74th Precinct was a sensory assault of institutional decay. The walls, painted a sickly seafoam green, were peeling and stained with decades of grime. The air smelled strongly of ammonia, stale coffee, and the metallic odour of dried blood. Fluorescent lights flickered erratically overhead, casting a sickly, strobing glow over the booking area. Trevor was hauled roughly by his arms through the chaotic bullpen. Phones were ringing off the hook, officers were shouting across desks cluttered with paperwork, and a few handcuffed suspects were slumped despondently on wooden benches. Nobody batted an eye as Green and Miller dragged Trevor past the booking desk, completely bypassing the standard intake procedures. No fingerprints, no mugshot, no phone call. "Take him straight to room 4, Green commanded, bypassing the holding cells. Room 4 was a notoriously soundproofed interrogation room tucked away at the end of a long, dark hallway. It was a small, claustrophobic box. A single metal table was bolted to the floor, flanked by 2 rigid metal chairs. In the corner, a camera with a red light mounted on the ceiling stared down blankly. Miller shoved Trevor into one of the chairs. The force caused the chair to scrape violently against the concrete floor. Green walked in slowly, closing the heavy steel door behind him. The click of the lock sounded as final as a coffin shutting. Green reached up and casually swatted the security camera. The red light blinked out. "Oops," Green said, his voice dripping with faux innocence. "Looks like we're experiencing technical difficulties again. Guess it's just you and me now, kid." Trevor sat straight, his hands still cuffed tightly behind his back. The pain in his shoulders was escalating into a burning ache, but he controlled his breathing, utilizing the tactical calming techniques drilled into him during his time at the FBI Academy in Quantico. He kept his expression passive, a blank canvas. Green pulled out the chair opposite Trevor, turning it around and straddling it. He leaned forward, resting his heavy arms on the backrest. He stared at Trevor for a long, uncomfortable minute, trying to establish psychological dominance. When Trevor didn't break eye contact, Green's jaw tightened. "You know, you're really starting to piss me off," Green growled. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small, clear plastic baggie filled with a crystalline white powder. He tossed it onto the metal table between them. It landed with a soft, damning thud. "Do you know what this is?" Green asked. "I've never seen that in my life," Trevor replied evenly. "Funny," Green smirked, leaning back, "because Officer Miller here just pulled it out of your left front pocket during your pat-down. Looks like roughly 20 grams of methamphetamine, with intent to distribute considering you're in a school zone. That's a federal mandatory minimum, boy. Your life as you know it is over." Trevor looked at the baggie, then back up at Green. "Falsifying evidence is a violation of Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under colour of law. It carries a heavy prison sentence, Captain." The room went dead silent. Miller, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a confused glance with his captain. The street vernacular they were used to hearing, begging, crying, cursing, was entirely absent. Instead, this random kid from the diner was quoting federal statutes with absolute precision. Green's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before hardening into a glare of absolute fury. He stood up violently, the chair clattering to the floor. He slammed his fists onto the metal table, leaning his face mere inches from Trevor's. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Green roared, spittle flying from his lips. "You think quoting some textbook bullshit is going to save you? I am the law here. I run the DA, I run the judges, and I sure as hell run the streets. I can make you disappear into the system and nobody will ever ask a single question about where you went." Trevor didn't lean back. He absorbed the tirade, committing the confession to memory. The audio recorder embedded in his shirt was capturing pristine audio of a precinct captain openly admitting to systemic corruption, evidence tampering, and judicial bribery. It was the golden ticket the FBI had spent 2 years trying to secure. "You run the streets," Trevor repeated softly, almost as if confirming a fact. "Tell me, Captain, do you run the extortion racket on 8th Street too? The one where you force the bodegas to pay $3,000 a month in protection fees?" Green froze. The colour drained slightly from his ruddy face. That was highly guarded information, known only to his most trusted inner circle. "How do you know about that?" Green demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know a lot of things," Trevor said, a tiny chilling smile finally creeping onto his lips. "I know you use the National Crime Information Center database to run plates for the local cartel. I know you funnel the cash through your brother's contracting business. And I know you're completely out of time." Green grabbed Trevor by the collar of his hoodie, hauling him half out of his chair. "Throw this piece of trash in holding!" Green barked at Miller, his composure shattering. "Don't process him. Don't log him in. I'm going to find out who he works for, and then I'm going to bury him under the jail." As Miller dragged Trevor out of the room, Trevor caught Green's eye one last time. The captain was breathing heavily, a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread pooling in his gut. The predator had just realized too late that he might actually be the prey. The holding cell deep in the bowels of the 74th Precinct was a miserable cage of rusted iron bars and cinder block walls. The floor was sticky with unidentified fluids, and the single exposed light bulb hanging from a wire cast harsh, erratic shadows across the room. There were 3 other men in the cell, 2 sleeping off a drunk and 1 sitting in the corner, staring blankly at the wall. Miller shoved Trevor roughly through the heavy iron door. It slammed shut with a reverberating clang, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place with a sound of utter finality. "Make yourself comfortable, lawyer," Miller spat through the bars, rapping his nightstick against the iron. "The captain's going to be down to see you in a bit. I'd start practicing your apologies." Trevor stood in the center of the cell, waiting until Miller's footsteps faded away down the concrete corridor. Only then did he move. He walked over to the far wall, away from the other inmates, and leaned his back against the cold cinder blocks. His hands were still cuffed behind him, his shoulders throbbing with a dull, persistent agony, but his mind was sharp, focused, and completely detached from the physical discomfort. 2 floors above him, Captain Samuel Green was storming into his plush, oversized office. He locked the door behind him and moved straight to a heavy oak filing cabinet. Unlocking the bottom drawer, he pulled out a bottle of top-shelf Macallan Scotch, confiscated during a raid on a high-end club months ago, and poured himself a generous measure in a dusty glass. Green's hands were shaking slightly. He downed the Scotch in one burning gulp. Who was that kid? An undercover internal affairs rat? A journalist? A runner for a rival crew? The fact that the kid knew about the 8th Street extortion and the NCIC database abuse was terrifying. Those were federal crimes, RICO Act violations. If that information got out, Green wasn't just looking at losing his badge, he was looking at spending the rest of his life in a supermax prison. "Damn it!" Green hissed, slamming the glass down on his desk. He reached for his desk phone, intending to call his brother to pause all money laundering operations immediately. He needed to do damage control. He needed to go back down to that cell and break that kid until he revealed who he was working for. Back in the cell, Trevor shifted his weight. His right thumb found the seam of his left sleeve. Woven intricately into the thick fabric of the hoodie was a microscopic, pressure-sensitive switch. It wasn't a standard panic button. It was a direct, encrypted, dead man's beacon linked to the FBI's mobile command center. Trevor pressed his thumb hard against the seam. 1 long press, 2 short, 1 long. Instantly, a microscopic vibration against his chest confirmed the signal had been sent. The operation had transitioned from the intelligence-gathering phase to the execution phase. The trap was sprung. 2 miles away, tucked invisibly inside a rundown abandoned warehouse, the interior of a massive, black, unmarked command vehicle lit up like a Christmas tree. Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Vance, a hardened 20-year veteran of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, watched the monitors as a red beacon pulsed to life on the digital map. "Signal received," a communications technician announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Agent Cox has triggered the Alpha sequence. Audio confirms physical assault, false imprisonment, and direct admission of Title 18 violations by the primary target." Vance nodded, his face turning to stone. They had spent 2 excruciating years building a watertight RICO case against Green and his cronies. They had the wiretaps, the financial records, the testimonies of terrified victims, but they needed Green to incriminate himself openly to nail down the civil rights charges. Trevor Cox, their youngest and most unflappable undercover agent, had just delivered the final nail in the coffin. "All units," Vance spoke into his headset, his voice broadcasting to dozens of heavily armed agents waiting in black tactical vehicles scattered around the perimeter of the 74th Precinct. We have a green light. Primary target is inside. Undercover agent is in holding. Execute Operation House Cleaning. We go in hard, we go in fast, nobody leaves that building. Back in the precinct, Green sat heavily in his leather office chair, staring at the phone. He took another sip of scotch, the alcohol warming his nerves. He looked at the Rolex on his wrist. It was 3:14 p.m., just another Tuesday in his kingdom. He convinced himself he was overreacting. He was Captain Green. He was untouchable. He would go downstairs, beat the kid to a pulp, throw him in the river, and that would be the end of it. He had no idea that a convoy of 8 black Chevy Suburbans had just turned onto the avenue, moving with terrifying, silent precision toward the front doors of his precinct. The storm wasn't just coming. It was already here. The atmosphere inside the 74th precinct was a facade of normal, chaotic police work. Phones rang, keyboards clacked, and officers complained about their shifts around the water cooler. None of them noticed the sudden, eerie silence that had fallen over the street outside. From the second-floor window of his office, Green couldn't see the street directly. He was too busy pacing the worn carpet, trying to strategize his next move. He picked up his desk phone, putting the receiver to his ear to call the booking desk. There was no dial tone, just a hollow, dead hiss. Green frowned, slamming the receiver down and picking it up again. Still nothing. "Piece of junk," he muttered. He reached to his belt and unclipped his Motorola police radio. He keyed the mic to call Sergeant Davis at the front desk. "Davis, this is Green. You copy?" The radio responded with a sharp burst of static, followed by absolute silence. The precinct's entire communication network had been systematically jammed. A sophisticated cellular and radio dampening field, generated by an FBI tactical van parked precisely 1 block away, had just effectively cut the 74th precinct off from the rest of the world. Down on the street, the scene was playing out with terrifying military precision. The 8 black Chevy Suburbans skidded to a halt in a perfect tactical perimeter, blocking every exit, driveway and alleyway associated with the precinct. Before the vehicles had even completely stopped, the doors flew open. Dozens of agents poured out onto the asphalt. They weren't wearing standard business suits. They were the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team, HRT, and specialized tactical units attached to the Color of Law Task Force. They wore heavy olive-drab Kevlar vests adorned with bold yellow FBI lettering, drop-leg holsters, and ballistic helmets. They carried M4 carbines, their faces set in expressions of absolute, uncompromising authority. "Perimeter secured! Move, move, move!" ordered the tactical team leader, his voice muffled by a balaclava. 2 teams of 4 agents sprinted toward the main glass doors of the precinct, moving in a flawless, synchronized wedge formation. Another team peeled off toward the underground sallyport, deploying a heavy hydraulic ram to breach the reinforced steel gates. A 4th team moved to the rear fire escapes. The building was completely surrounded in under 20 seconds. Inside the bullpen, Sergeant Davis, a 30-year veteran who had turned a blind eye to Green's corruption for a cut of the profits, looked up from his paperwork. He noticed a strange, rhythmic thudding sound coming from outside, like the heavy footsteps of an approaching army. He stood up, walking toward the heavy reinforced glass doors of the front entrance. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, placing a hand on his duty belt. He peered through the glass, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror. A wall of tactical agents was charging directly at the doors. Leading them was a man holding a massive steel battering ram. "Holy mother of—" Davis gasped, stumbling backward, his hand instinctively gripping the handle of his sidearm. Smash! The reinforced glass exploded inward with a deafening crash, showering the lobby in a million glittering shards. The heavy doors were blown completely off their hinges, groaning violently before slamming onto the linoleum floor. Through the cloud of dust and pulverized glass stepped the full wrath of the federal government. "Federal agents! FBI! Nobody move!" The roar of a dozen amplified voices echoed through the cavernous bullpen, completely drowning out the ringing phones and the shouts of the local officers. Laser sights sliced through the dusty air, dozens of red dots painting the chests of the corrupt cops standing frozen in the room. The sheer, overwhelming force was paralyzing. The tactical agents moved into the room like water, instantly securing every angle, every desk, and every hallway. "Hands off your weapons! Step away from the desks! Get on the ground now!" The local officers, men and women who had spent years acting as untouchable warlords in this neighborhood, suddenly realized how incredibly outgunned and outmatched they were. The panic in their eyes was primal. Some threw their hands in the air immediately, dropping to their knees. Others froze, staring in shock at the barrels of the federal carbines pointed directly at their heads. Sergeant Davis, his hand still hovering over his holster, locked eyes with an FBI tactical operator. The operator's M4 was aimed squarely at Davis's nose. "Touch that gun, and you're a dead man," the operator stated coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. Davis swallowed hard, trembling violently. Slowly, agonizingly, he raised his hands high into the air and dropped to his knees, interlacing his fingers behind his head. The corrupt fortress had fallen in less than a minute. Upstairs, Captain Green heard the explosive crash of the front doors. The sound vibrated up through the floorboards, rattling the bottle of scotch on his desk. He froze, the glass slipping from his fingers and shattering against the floor, amber liquid seeping into the cheap carpet. He ran to his office door and threw it open, looking down the stairwell. What he saw made his blood run completely cold. A squad of men in tactical gear, bearing the golden letters of the FBI, were storming up the stairs, moving with lethal purpose directly toward him. The raid had begun, and there was absolutely nowhere to run. The second floor of the 74th Precinct became a scene of organized, overwhelming chaos. The heavy, rhythmic stomping of combat boots echoed down the narrow corridor as the FBI tactical team ascended the stairs. Captain Green stumbled backward into his office, slamming the heavy wooden door shut, his mind, usually sharp and cunning, completely short-circuited in a state of sheer panic. He lunged for the deadbolt, twisting it shut, his breathing coming in ragged, panicked gasps. He backed away from the door, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He looked at the filing cabinet, holding his ledger of extorted businesses. He looked at the loose floorboard where he kept a stash of unregistered throwaway guns. "Open the door! FBI! Warrant execution!" A booming voice roared from the hallway, followed immediately by the terrifyingly heavy thud of a battering ram striking the wood. The doorframe splintered. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Green drew his service weapon, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the heavy Smith & Wesson M&P shield. He aimed it at the door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Thud. The lock gave way. The door burst inward, flying off its hinges and crashing onto Green's desk. 3 agents flooded into the room, their weapons instantly tracking to Green. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" the lead agent screamed, stepping into Green's line of sight, completely unafraid. Green looked at the agent, then at the 3 black muzzles pointed directly at his chest. The reality of his situation crashed down on him like an anvil. He wasn't a king anymore. He was a cornered rat. Slowly, his fingers went limp. The gun slipped from his grasp, clattering loudly onto the floor. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Green dropped to his knees, the expensive fabric of his uniform trousers tearing on the glass shards of his broken Scotch glass. Rough hands grabbed his arms, wrenching them backward with far more force than necessary. Slapping heavy, rigid steel handcuffs over his wrists, they locked with a brutal click. Captain Samuel Green, Supervisory Special Agent Vance, stepped into the office, his suit immaculate amidst the chaos, holding a thick manila folder. "You are under arrest for violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, extortion, evidence tampering, and massive violations of Title 18, Section 242. Your precinct is officially under federal control." Green's face was pressed against his own desk, his cheek smushed against the wood. "You have no jurisdiction here," he spat, spitting blood from a bitten lip. "I own the DA. I own the mayor. You're making a huge mistake." Vance smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "The DA was indicted 20 minutes ago. The mayor is currently holding a press conference disavowing you. It's over, Sam. Your little empire is ash." Meanwhile, down in the basement, the tactical team had breached the holding cells. The heavy iron door swung open. Officer Miller, who had been guarding the corridor, was already face down on the floor, his hands zip-tied behind his back, crying silently. An agent wearing a tactical vest with the letters OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility, stepped up to the cell where Trevor was being held. He pulled a heavy ring of keys confiscated from Miller and unlocked the door. "You good, Agent Cox?" the tactical operator asked, stepping back to give Trevor space. Trevor slowly stood up from the cinder block wall. He rolled his shoulders, wincing slightly as the circulation returned to his hands. He looked at the terrified inmates huddled in the corner of the cell, giving them a reassuring nod. "I'm fine, Martinez. Let's get these cuffs off." The agent unlocked Trevor's handcuffs. Trevor rubbed his raw, red wrists, taking a deep breath of the stale air. He reached into the collar of his hoodie, deactivating the biometric transmitter. He was no longer the helpless civilian. His posture completely changed. The slight slouch vanished, replaced by the rigid, confident stance of an elite federal investigator. "Where is he?" Trevor asked, his voice low and deadly. "Second floor. Vance is reading him his rights right now," Martinez replied, handing Trevor a sleek leather badge wallet. Trevor flipped it open, revealing the gleaming gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and his identification card. He clipped it onto his belt right next to his concealed holster. He walked out of the cell, stepping right over the sobbing Officer Miller without a second glance. He had a final appointment to keep. The karma hit was about to arrive, and Trevor was going to deliver it personally. He marched toward the stairs, the sound of federal agents tearing apart the corrupt precinct serving as a symphony of justice behind him. The bullpen of the 74th Precinct looked like a war zone of bureaucracy. File cabinets were being emptied into heavy plastic evidence bins. Computers were being ripped from their sockets, hard drives confiscated by FBI cybercrime specialists. Corrupt officers, stripped of their weapons and badges, sat handcuffed in a long line against the wall, their heads hung in disgrace. Trevor Cox walked straight through the center of the room. Agents nodded to him as he passed. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, his boots echoing with heavy, deliberate steps. When he reached Captain Green's office, the scene was entirely under control. Green was sitting forcefully in a wooden chair, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, his uniform disheveled and stained. SSA Vance was standing nearby, watching agents bag up stacks of illicit cash found hidden in the floorboards. Trevor stepped into the doorway. The room fell silent. Green looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a mixture of rage and terror. He saw the young black man he had violently arrested just an hour ago. He saw the faded hoodie and the jeans, but then his eyes drifted down to the belt. He saw the gleaming gold badge. Special Agent. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Green's mouth opened, but no words came out. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, sickly ghost. The arrogant, untouchable king of the street suddenly looked like a terrified, broken old man. "You," Green stammered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You were a plant." Trevor walked slowly into the room, stopping just 2 feet from Green. He looked down at the corrupt captain with an expression of absolute, terrifying apathy. "You asked me if I had a problem, Captain," Trevor said, his voice echoing the exact calm tone he had used in the diner, but now carrying the weight of the entire federal justice system. "I told you I was just reading the news. You decided to make me the news?" Green swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically. "Look, we can work this out. I have money, I have information. I can give you the Russian syndicates down on the docks. I can give you everything." "You already gave us everything we needed," Trevor replied coldly. "Your little speech in the interrogation room, the confession about the bodegas, the NCIC database, the fake evidence. It was broadcast live in crystal-clear audio to a federal judge sitting in our command center. He signed the warrants before you even finished your drink." Green slumped forward, hyperventilating. The sheer magnitude of his mistake was physically crushing him. He had profiled the wrong man. He had let his arrogance blind him. "You called me boy, Captain," Trevor continued, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only Green could hear. "You put your hands on me. You stripped away my rights because you thought you could get away with it. Let me introduce myself properly. I am Special Agent Trevor Cox, Public Corruption Unit, and you are going to spend the rest of your miserable life in a federal penitentiary surrounded by the very people you put there." Trevor stood up straight, turning to SSA Vance. "Take this piece of trash out of my sight!" Vance nodded, signaling 2 massive HRT agents. They grabbed Green roughly by the arms, hauling him to his feet. Green didn't struggle. He was completely broken, staring blankly at the floor as they frog-marched him out of his own office. Trevor walked over to the shattered window and looked down at the street. The convoy of black Suburbans was waiting. A crowd of locals had gathered behind the police tape drawn by the commotion. As Green was led out of the front doors of the precinct in handcuffs, shoved toward the back of a federal transport van, a cheer erupted from the crowd. The neighborhood, terrorized for years by the captain's corrupt regime, watched the tyrant fall. They watched him shoved into the back of the van, the doors slamming shut on his freedom forever. Karma hadn't just knocked on Captain Green's door, it had kicked it completely off the hinges. Trevor watched the van drive away, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting in the broken glass on the street. He reached up, rubbing the faint red marks still visible on his wrists from the handcuffs. A small, satisfied smile crossed his face. The heat of the afternoon was finally starting to break. It was a good day to be a federal agent. If you love this story of brutal, satisfying karma and corrupt power getting completely dismantled, make sure you hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel out. What did you think of Special Agent Trevor Cox's incredible undercover patience and Captain Green's massive downfall? Let me know your favorite part down in the comments below. And if you want to hear more intense, dramatic stories of justice, revenge, and jaw-dropping twists, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who loves a great karma story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.